So hi everybody, I'm Liz Chavinsky. I'm an objects conservator and I'm a member of the BCHERN steering committee. I'm here with my colleague Tara Fraser, paper conservator, and we're grateful to live and work in the ancestral and unceded homelands of the Hunkaminam and the Squamish speaking people. If I had to describe myself, I'd say I'm a middle-aged white lady of average height with shorter gray hair and a side part and a wearer of glasses. That's always consistent. I'm comfortable with she, her pronouns, and I hope that covers who I am. We are both very grateful to all of you for coming to hear this presentation and to the Heritage BC for including us in their conference on agents of change, because that's exactly what we want to be. Oh, I'm going to go back one more. I'm going to go back because this is the confluence of the Thompson and Fraser rivers, and it's in the area of the town of Litton. We're going to be talking a bit more about the town of Litton because it's such an amazing story that we got to participate in. And also the Litton First Nation is in this region. We are just two of a group of 5 ladies. We're all conservators. We spend a lot of time on Zoom, and so these are my funny sketches of what we look like when we're doing our resource building and workshop planning. So it's Anne Desplanches on your left, then myself, Liz Chavinsky, Tara Fraser, Casey Lee, and Heidi Swarenga. So the BCHERN is a growing group of people organized around emergency response. We're heritage practitioners of all kinds, museums, galleries, archives, libraries, and we're interested in supporting each other and receiving support. And this group is willing to be trained in salvage responsive collections. Our core aim is to grow confidence in our community and to improve our ability to recover from a regional emergency. And if anything, the experience that Litton has gone through has really put that philosophy on the map and woken up, I think, the heritage sector to realize we might have bigger things to deal with, and it's time to get ready. In our professional roles, we've intervened, experienced, and heard about disasters at many museums and their ensuing collection salvage and recovery work. These events motivated us to action. On the left, you can see the lobby with the flood in 2013. This is the lobby of the Museum of Anthropology at UBC. They have, kind of a cascading site with a roadway at the higher end, and at 3 in the afternoon, a water main broke. It was obviously unexpected, and the water poured towards the building, came underneath the beautiful glass doors, rolled its way down the ramp towards the Great Hall where the big totem poles are standing, and there's a giant glass window and a beautiful view of the ocean. And luckily it was 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So everybody was there, everybody was willing to be engaged, everybody was highly motivated and joined in. There was a huge response of all the staff. In one of the exhibits, they happened to have sandbags on hand. I think it was to balance out the weight of a car that didn't have an engine in it, and so it was like an exhibit ploy to keep this thing stable. So they stole all those sandbags and shoved them up against the door and stopped the water, so management could say, we have responded and now all is well. But of course, Heidi, the conservator at the museum, was thinking, what if this was 3 a.m.? And what if we didn't have these sandbags? Do we actually have resources ready for this? And although there were many helpful people, many of them took off their shoes in order to go into the water because they wanted to protect their shoes. So they were barefoot in flood water. And had anyone checked to see if the power had been turned off? All those preparation things. Heidi realized that her plan was on her desk and was unfinished and had been unpracticed, and so this was a very motivational moment. And the second slide, or second image, is of the Amista Cultural Center in Alert Bay on the traditional territory of the Kwakwaka'wakw people. they had an accidental fire that resulted in, luckily not burning of their exhibit, but they had smoke damage and water damage. And they connected immediately, staff connected with the larger museums and asked for help, and the conservators wanted to go. But there was a time delay of 3 days as the supplies were gathered up, because we were thinking, what do we need to be useful? And to receive permission from management to go, because the conservators would be leaving their regular schedule activities and jobs that are paid, and for however much time, end up in the north of Vancouver Island. And the administration had kind of a hard time with that. So they received their guarantees of repayment at the end of the work and everything. But it left us with this feeling like, well, we want to help, but how do we get there fast? I was at a conference, a CAC conference in Edmonton, and learned about this flood of I always get it mixed up. It's the Museum of the Highwood in High River, Alberta. So they'd had a fire in the train station building that is their museum building. They'd had a fire a few years back, and all their collections had been moved into a basement storage a little ways away. Unfortunately, it was within the flood zone of the river, and in 2013, the entire town was flooded. It was a massive flood, and as you can see in this incredible picture of a massive flood. So that basement storage was completely full of water, so from floor to ceiling. All the collections were picked up by the water, they were moved around by the water, they were covered in river dirt, and it took 2 weeks to get into that space in order to pull the collections out. Conservators came and helped. They learned all kinds of things about how to prioritize, how to get into this terrible collections area. They needed to move things that weren't priority items. They couldn't get to the priorities. They couldn't recognize the priorities. They were covered in mud. There was poor documentation, and the numbering on objects, which we number things so carefully, but you learn that tags disappear, and B72 will just ping right off in too much water after too long. So we end up losing our documentation. It was a very confusing and difficult site. I could just have that one slide I do. But we learned a lot of lessons. It was extremely stressful. There was some initial cleaning that took place under those harsh conditions, and that really saved the collection, that you could clean things a little bit, realize what they are, freeze those items in order to buy time, and deal with them in a more detailed manner later on when you have the time to do that. And those lessons we've incorporated into our workshops. We were very inspired by all of these crazy situations. And this proved to us that there was a need for conservators to be of help, but we weren't quite sure how to manage that for the province of BC. So we thought about, what about just dividing the province into zones? We looked at how Emergency Management BC has done that. So we've divided the province as they have, with transit corridors so that neighbors can be able to reach each other and be helpful to each other. And we wanted to have a network of people that were morally motivated, because there's quite a high sense of moral connection that we feel towards our places of work. And we thought if we built a network of support within the province that fitted our needs, that surely everybody else would want to join in as well. They would see that this is a good and useful project. So by dividing the province into zones, we thought that there could be a designated zone leader who would nurture the zone, communicate with members, and maintain a call tree, and create a thriving network. We thought about what do we need to do to build a support for heritage keepers in these zones. We knew that there was a lot of resource at the CCI, the Canadian Conservation Institute, for prevention and for plan building, but that actual, what do I do with these impacted collections that look terrible, that need salvage and recovery, we knew that there weren't many resources for that, and that there was a lack of training in that area. So that's where we decided to jump in. So our sneaky goal is to create a more resilient series of communities, and the network is intended to build community in 3 different ways. So we hope to bring people together. We hope that our salvage workshops will train them so that they will be of use to each other, and will remain connected either physically by going to incidents or by being a phone resource. We started making what we thought are useful resources. We built a graphic. We call this the Cody diagram because the designer, Cody Rocco at MOA, built it for us. And it shows you in graphic form the flow of activities that are typical in the salvage of collections. So they're all numbered and kind of organized looking, but really it's a very fluid event, an emergency. And you might have to go back to number 2 when really you've been over at number 4 for a while. And we include anyway all of these steps in our workshops. All of the resources that we've built are on our website, and they're downloadable by everybody. This is, so we started with in-person training, and we did a 1-day workshop in 2019, I think this is, in Prince George. We didn't think that people could get more than a day away from work to do, to learn what we thought they should learn. So we created an extremely stressful 1-day event. And they said that's too much, because we have a survey. And so we created a 2-day event anyway. That's how we do it now. We did virtual training during COVID.
You're okay.
Yeah, right. Now we're back in person, so it's 2 days. It's still stressful, but it's fun. We have the detailed information on the website. So if you want to learn all about documentation and read for a half an hour a 6-day support document, you can. But there's also very simple support there, which is like our drying tent information, which is lots of images and few words, because you're stressed and can't speak or think in words when you're stressed.
And keep looking, because we're making more.
We are making more, slowly. We have resource kits throughout the province, and this is the supplies for to augment your own emergency supplies, and these are specific for collection salvage. This is our initial network, and these are the folks that are in it now, folks that have taken the training, and these are people that you can rely on to be useful to you. We hope that you too will be inspired to join in, take a workshop. Look at how fun it is. These people are all happy. We have this box that they have to salvage, and like you look at the box, you go, oh, no big deal. It's super stressful. And at the end of it, that stress has like bonded you and your group of 6 or 7 people together. You know you can do anything. These are the different locations: Prince George, Rossland, Abbotsford, Vancouver, Campbell River, where we have given workshops. And we'll be moving on to Victoria and Taku River and Haida Gwaii if we're really lucky. Ha! And with that, I will shift over to my colleague, Tara, who will talk to you about the Litton response. Thanks, Liz. And I'll jump in. Oops. Great. Sorry.
Good morning, and thank you again. My name is Tara, and I'm, I'd say, a middle-aged white lady with longer curly hair. And today I'm dressed in black because it was unofficial Johnny Cash Day. So I'm dressed in black, and I see that I have accessories of cat hair, and my preferred, I'm comfortable with her and she as my pronouns. So we'd like to share with you just quickly some results of having been trained, but also working with other trained people and in a trained group, by telling you the story of the Litton Creek fires, the fire that happened in 2021 that I'm sure most of you are familiar with. We were called in to help recover some of the materials of the cultural property that was damaged and potentially lost in this fire. Lorna Fandich, who is the founder of the developer of the Chinese History Museum in Litton, was instrumental in helping us. She was a very key player, and she was one of the two people that reached out to us to come and help. And she's given us permission to show this picture. This is her son's house, which was lost completely. He wasn't living there at the time, but the tenant that was there lost everything. And an image, so we show this with permission from her. An image like this can be very triggering for someone who's been through a fire. We show it here, just to emphasize that it's really hard to imagine what complete loss can look like for a community. So, it was complete loss. There was just a lot of chimneys and a lot of concrete foundation footings, and this black, charred, apocalyptic-looking trees with a few bursts of bright yellow sunflowers. It was very strange, but there was nothing else there. There was no place for the community to gather, to talk, to mourn. Anything that was left was covered in soot. And in fact, residents had not been allowed into the contaminated site, so they were grieving but had no way to move forward. This is 3 months after the actual event. So Lorna, this is 2 images on the right. We have the exterior before the fire of the Litton Chinese Museum, and on your right, is a view of the interior exhibit space before the fire. And I just want to point out the display cases that are in glass right here, in the center of the room and against the wall. So Lorna had purchased the site where the traditional Chinese Joss house had been, and she was in the process of she had rebuilt the museum, the house, and she was in the process of acquiring collections that tell the story of the contributions of the Chinese miners and railway workers, farmers, and merchants, and the contribution that they made to the interior of British Columbia. So this is an image of the site afterwards, and it's a site from just about the same view as the previous slide. So this is an image, and what we're seeing here is some people standing at street level looking down into what would have been the basement. There's a concrete foundation all the way around, and there's just rubble as far as metal that survived, but indistinguishable. Over on the far, at the top of this image, you can see a display case that's cantilevered out over the space. At the top, right by the 3 people, and in it is some glass had melted over many objects. We'll see when we come back to those. So Lorna, at this point, Lorna is looking at her collection and her museum for the first time. It was very devastating for her. The first day, there's some back and forth. We had gone out around Thanksgiving. Heidi and I had gone out. We did like a recognizance. We looked at it because we had no idea what we would need for people, resources, supplies, etc. So we went out for 2 days, had a look, made a game plan, gathered our troops, as it were, and went back out. So like I say, Lorna is seeing this for the first time. On the second day, this is Lorna on your left, and she's pointing at a basket and some melted shelving and a vase that she's interested in. But like I say, that first day was really depressing and devastating for her. But by the second day, she had come back to us with a map shown on the right at the top of the floor plan. And she was able to say to us, what I really would like if we could concentrate in this area, that's where the collection of certain teapots would have been. Not this area, that would have been the lunchroom, etc. So you saw in the image before how it was rubble. We would not have known that if it weren't for her. So, having her there to be able to, as the keeper of the knowledge, if you will, from that institution, she helped educate us and target us to salvage the most important items. She was able to say, don't worry about that really pretty stuff. this stuff that you can see on the bottom right of broken dishes, but it looks like china, it looks very, important. She said, no, that's from our staff room. Just leave it alone. And it was very difficult to step over, like teacups and pieces of pottery, but she said, don't worry about those. So that was really helpful for us. It mattered to her to have the team search for what she was looking for most importantly. And so having her and having the floor plan was hugely instrumental. So the images you're looking here, there's the one on the right and on your right is a worker looking down, standing at ground level wearing a white Tyvek suit, looking down on the pit, as we called it. There's that cantilevered shelf again. And then on your left is some workers, some of us recovering, and we're wearing yellow Tyvek. If you went down into the pit, or the basement, that was the basement, you wore full hazmat, including respirator, gloves, hard hat, goggles, and a yellow Tyvek suit. If you had that on, you could go in the pit. If you didn't, you had a white out Tyvek, and you could only go on the perimeter. You couldn't go down, and that's because the site was contaminated with heavy metals and asbestos and things like that. So because it was a contaminated site, we had to take a lot of precautions we didn't know about. So the first expedition was just forging a path to what she wanted, because our ladder, in the image on the left, you can see the ladder going down into the rubble, and that was the entrance by the staff room. So we came in down at the staff room and had to work our way over to her storage room. So highest on her list was the collection of various teapots that she had. And there's there's two images, and there's one of Lorna's beloved tin glazed, large blue designed teapots. So what we have is the yellow team excavator found this teapot, handed it to another yellow team who walked it over to the ladder, and maybe up the ladder, handing it off to a white suited person. And they would be then able to do the work above ground. So that was the process, or the pathway, if you will, and the spotters. The white team also was able to guide the yellow team, who really couldn't see much. You're hot, you're sweaty, you're uncomfortable. And frankly, when you're leaning over, your nose starts to run, you've got a respirator on, it wasn't nice. The people in yellow had a maximum 3 hours, and you couldn't go longer. They wouldn't for health reasons, of course, and mental health. Also, your bladder usually wouldn't let you, and you weren't allowed to get out of the suit and get back in because it was contaminated. So the important for us, I had a little red laser. So what you're looking at now is three images, and on the left, I'm working with Lorna to look at some stuff that came up from the pit. And it was really important to have her as a decision maker and a keeper of the knowledge to be able to look at that bucket of things I have, to say yes or no. This is not worth keeping. I can get more of this. I can't. And then on the bottom, she was able to say, I can get this cheaper somewhere else. I have another copy, etc. So on the right-hand side and the bottom, you're looking at a pile of stuff that she deemed not important. And of course, all of us wanted to keep going back and recovering from that site too, but we're able not to. And then once the items that she said yes to were brought up, we removed the surface dirt either with a wind and a brush, helped us through things that were on the surface. And then we did some progressive washing, 3 stages, wash the first, second, and third to get rid of the decontamination. And on the right, you have an image of Anne Deplanche doing the documentation, and we kept it very simple. The location by where they found the item, and what the item was, and then what's in that box. And then here's an image of the packed boxes, so Lorna can say, look at that and say, well, these 3 boxes, the stuff in them was found on the south wall. That's all we needed to know at this point. And then showing a packing of a vessel on that side. This is an image of a trailer that we learnt. We were there as volunteers of a larger organization that got permits and stuff that we didn't have. And they taught us about decontamination of ourselves. They had a trailer set up where you're hot when you're contaminated and dressed in your yellow, and you go through the process of going into the trailer, around and out, disrobing of the contaminated items as you go. So when you come out, the cold side, you're wearing your normal outfit, but mentally you've divested of the contamination as well. So it was both a physical and a mental process to go through this hot, warm, cold cycle. It was a very interesting thing that we learned that way. Well, this is Heidi and I. Just at 3.5 hours, it's in these suits, it's exhausting. And you really need to keep track of your mental health and that of your workers. Not everybody is suited to dress in those outfits and go down to that pit, but there's many different roles, and you find what role is suitable for you. There's absolutely no shortage of jobs, but there is a shortage of different aptitudes for different activities, and it's really important that you know your workers. And here you see Hope and Trish, wasn't it? Anyway, finding different moments to get a mental health break, to get some warmth, to just take a minute, sit in the sun like the image on the right, or have a refreshment or some hydration like the image on the left. Because it's really important that the emotional side. So you see, Lauren on the first day was devastated. By the second day, she was exuberant. We had found like 400 things. So she was just beside herself. And where we are now is Litton. It was a constant learning for us, and it shows how meaningful the recovery. It showed us how meaningful the recovery of cultural property can be. It was very impactful on so many positive levels. We learned that through this about our training process and how to tweak our training process to be more applicable, and it reaffirmed some of the things we are doing are appropriate, so that was very useful. And it also put the BCHERN on the map, truthfully. Before this, sometimes we had to cancel a workshop because we didn't have enough people, and now we can't do enough workshops to keep up with the demand. So it was really influential for us. But the people of Litton, and this is an image of Litton in 2022, on the right and on the left is just a geographical map showing the fires in 2022. And the town of Litton, they're still not quite not rebuilding. Of course, there's more fires last summer, and then right now, and this summer, we can expect more fires. It will always be Canada's hotspot. But it made us really realize that we, as a positive change, we need to start thinking about what we're doing now. And these are just two images. One's a teapot. It's the same teapot on the right and the left, but on the left it's covered with molten glass. And we found that if you just hit the glass in the right spot, it'll pop off because it melts at a lower temperature than the teapot. So we were able to salvage the teapot, and that was a lot of fun. We don't get to do that very often as conservators.
An artifacts treatment done by a paper conservator.
Because the artifacts conservators were all like prissy, you know. In this case, showing you on the right is an old book. Like it's clearly a book, except that it's white ash that looks like a book. And this is after 3 months of going through the weather, etc. On the left, we have the bottom of a woven basket that's been charred, is now charcoal, is no longer a basket, can't even be handled. But this kind of thing still can provide information. It can provide information to the community about the weaver, about the weaving, about what was collected. There's a lot of information we can still learn. So we need to, whether it survives wholly or not, you might get something out of it. And this was really important, both for us and for Lorna. And finally, we have a lot of significant climate events in recent years. With like before Litton and Heritage Keepers, we know that a plan is important, but now we can really see ourselves in that situation thanks to Litton, and it becomes a little more realistic, right? So we need that, we learned that we can overcome these circumstances by investing in the salvage work as soon as possible instead of waiting several months. And again, our training and our partnership and our community that Liz talked about, how we're trying to grow this community. Hopefully these kind of responses are going to garner, or these kind of events will garner a more advanced or a faster response, or salvage, if you will. And then where's the BCHERN going? Well, we're taking a little bit of a divergence right now, and we're looking at, with the Strathcona Regional District, we got a large grant just recently, and we're going to provide workshops and training on Vancouver Island to Indigenous communities who are holders of belongings, but in their home, within their communities. And it's not just the belongings, but also the supplies as well. And so we're going to look at how can we increase the knowledge, the response, etc., and how can our training be adapted to their needs specifically in this area. So we're really looking forward to that as a little bit of a divergence for us. So thank you, and the BCHERN is not done alone. We function, we're all volunteers. The 5 of us on the steering committee are volunteers, as well as we get our funding from the Museum Assistance Program from Canadian Heritage. And there's us after the soot stops, after the dust settles. Is that you? Yeah. But thank you very much.
So I'm just asking about timeline. So the Litton fire happened in July, and I saw the boxes labeled in October. When was the earliest you guys got in there for that singular building, and how many of you were working on it?
Yeah. It's on. Thank you for the question. We knew about the fire, and people reached out to us within a few days of the fire. One thing leading to the next, and because it was a contaminated site, etc., it was Thanksgiving that Heidi and I went for the first time. And we went for 2 days, came back for 2 days. And then we went in 2 more shifts between 5 and 7 people. I think the total, if I remember correctly, on site was 9 days, including the recognizance 2 days. So 6 or 7 days on site. Is that right?
Yeah.
About there.
Yeah.
Because we did two other sites besides Lorna's, at the time. But yeah. So the timeline was 3 months later.
How would one get involved with BCHERN?
Excellent question. How would one get involved with BCHERN? Well, show interest, be part of the heritage community, or not even, because we've had people that have nothing to do with heritage take our workshops. You can become a member of the network if you take a workshop and you're trained. So because our goal is to really get people in a neighborhood, in part of BC, to know each other, we are dispersed. So someone in an archives over there and a heritage museum over there, it might be physically relatively close to each other, but they may never have met. And because of COVID also, there was quite a, an Xing of social activities and sharing of work. So we want you to get to know each other. We want you to take a workshop so that you know the basic skills and see what it's like to work through that situation and have the skills to get a collection from a scary stage to where it's not getting any worse, where things are dry and they're on a shelf and you can figure out your next steps in a reasonable manner.
The workshops are 2 days, and because they're the workshops are 2 days, and because they're funded, I think we charge $45, which includes lunch and coffee and everything on both days. Can't go wrong, right? I think the next one is in Delta in November.
Delta, November.
Yeah.
It's on our website.
It's on our website.
Hi, I'm just wondering, I know you were up in Yale for about 9 days when you were doing your work. You were saying, how, when you go into something like that and the whole town is burned, what do you do about accommodations?
We were really fortunate. Well, we glamped. We were doing glamping. Lorna found it, who owned the thing just outside of the village. She owned a river rafting camping that had tents, but also had these canvas-sided little huts, and had a restaurant and had all this, and she provided us with accommodation.
If you didn't have that, what would you do?
Well, we probably would have taken up trailers or like some kind of motor home or something, or in that some of the people that were in other areas were commuting from Cache Creek or Hope or wherever. I know, right? We had no water, no running water or anything, so Labatt's produces canned water, and we were washing things with what looked like beer, but it was actually just canned water.
How is it determined where the items go after they've been retrieved from the site? Like which organization or facility takes care of them, and when is it determined when they can be returned to whoever originally owned them before or cared for them?
I'm not sure I understand.
Where did the stuff go?
You mean
Well,
Litton
after
or
that.
in general?
Yeah, like
Specific?
is it just like the closest museum stores it for the damaged building while it's damaged?
Okay, well, in that case, Lorna put them in her truck and drove away, and she put them in her home or her place of business or in boxes. They just sat there, probably still there in boxes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Till she rebuilds, and that's why they have to be really dry and clean when they get put in the box.
Mm-hmm.
You might not see them for many years. So
Okay.
it's usually up to the owner or the custodian to take care of that. We get it to a point that's safe and stable for them to handle, and then move on.
Okay.
And that's what's in your plan, right? That's the part that we don't do, is to tell you how to write a plan.
Rehabilitation.
And so the part of the plan is preparing and organizing everyone and training everyone, and then also knowing what are the spaces available to you to take care of the collection while you're having to clean it and store it. Because of course your storage area, like in High River, Highwood, High River is terrible. They should have a more distinctive name. Where were they going to put their stuff, right? The whole town was affected, so of course then it's some kind of warehouse storage, or the Belfour can help you with that sort of thing, but that's in the plan.
Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. I can't recommend BCHERN enough. I've done one of their workshops and it's fantastic, and they're a really great resource we have in BC, so I'm really glad they're here today as well. Oh, thank you, perfect. So my name's Teresa McFarland. I'm really uncomfortable physically describing myself, but in my inclusive session yesterday, we talked about learning in those moments of uncomfort, so I'm going to do it. So I'm a white, blonde woman from Generation X, although I like to think I passed as a millennial. And I'm going to be talking a little bit about emergency preparedness for heritage and tourism sector. I'm going to be starting pretty high level at our ministry approach, working down to our branch approach, and then Chelsea, my colleague over here, is going to speak about one of our provincial heritage properties and a more local approach there. So, basics of emergency preparedness. Emergency preparedness includes all activities such as plans, procedures, contact lists, and exercises undertaken in anticipation of a likely emergency. The goal is to be prepared to make sure that an organization is ready and able to respond quickly and effectively in the event of emergency. The purpose of this is to build an organization's resilience and reduce losses associated with emergencies. So planning versus salvage and response. BCHERN is there to help you in the salvage and response phase, but planning comes before that. However, the two are also related. Planning helps you to be prepared to respond as quickly as possible to reduce and mitigate impacts. I think we saw a great example of having the floor plan, knowing exactly where the most important items are to help you to be able to respond quickly. So it's also sad to see it's actually 3 months later that they were able to respond. So different emergencies have different responses. So Heritage Branch is within the Tourism Sector Strategy Division and within the Ministry of Tourism, Culture, Arts and Sports with the province of BC. In 2022, the ministry developed BC's Tourism Emergency Management Framework, the plan and partners in action. The next few slides are based off of this framework. The purpose of this framework provides a unified structure to support tourism partners and visitors on matters related to the 4 pillars of emergency preparedness, namely mitigation, preparedness, response, and recovery. The framework is intended to help reduce the industry's vulnerabilities and risks and lessen the potential adverse impacts to visitors experienced during emergencies. The framework aligns with BC Emergency Management System and is based on an all-in society approach, which means considering multi-sector stakeholders and facilitating their active participation in the decision-making process to ensure appropriate measures are taken together. So again, the 4 pillars are preparedness, being ready to respond, mitigation, prevent, minimize, or avoid impacts, and response, addressing direct impacts, and recovery, restore, and financial assistance. These phases occur sequentially and sometimes concurrently, as modeled in the graphic. Each phase poses different challenges and must be addressed in an emergency management program. The hope is to continually improve the process. So expanding on the 4 pillars a little bit, mitigation includes adaptation measures. The tourism sector continues to build resilience to support business continuity, crisis communications, and post-disaster marketing in the face of disaster events. And there are tools available that I'll get into later, such as Tourism Emergency Management Committee Annual Work Plan. Preparedness, the tourism agencies and industries are ready to respond to emergency events and support emergency agencies and visitors' needs are integrated into emergency management plans. In the response, the Tourism Emergency Response Plan is ready to activate and support an emergency agencies to ensure the safety and well-being of visitors and maintain the reputation of BC as a safe and desirable destination. And recovery, the economic impact of emergencies on the visitor economy is hopefully reduced. Here's a little bit of BC's emergency management structure for significant events. So emergency response starts at the community level, with the province providing support as the scale of the emergency grows. Regional offices support local governments. The emergency framework recognizes 4 levels of response which are activated during the event. These are site level, site support, provincial, regional, and provincial central. Each level above site command is responsible for providing increasingly broader coordination, planning, and support for the operations occurring at site level. So challenges for tourism heritage sector. Challenges include it's a diverse industry with a variety of businesses, overlapping jurisdictions responsible, focus on citizens and community safety is a big part of it, and organizations and businesses are affected differently in the same emergency. So I'm going to go into some aspects of building an emergency plan. And there is a template that the province has available if you've never done this before and you're interested to try it on your own. You can also hire a professional as well, but I'll go through some of the main aspects of building an emergency plan. So risk and impact assessment. Know your risks and how much of an impact they might have. Know your surroundings and potential emergencies. These vary by region. You know, in Victoria, it's earthquakes. Out at Barkerville and Cottonwood, high rolling over there, flooding. Fire, extreme heat, extreme cold are some things we're starting to experience in different regions of BC. And then know your priorities. Is it human health and safety? That's a big one, obviously. Some of our sites, Kilby, have animals. Specific artifacts, specific buildings. What are we hoping to save if we have only 5 minutes to save something? And what do the crews need to know who can go in? The more you can give them, you know, the knowledge keepers couldn't go in right away, so you folks needed to go in. And the more you could know about where you should go and what you should look for, the better you're able to help. So the emergency response team. Consider forming a team. Determine who is responsible for what in an emergency and ensure their contact information is handy. Core business functions. Create an inventory of critical assets and processes that are essential to keep your museum or heritage site operating. For museums with collections, this should include an inventory of critical artifacts. It's also a good reminder, I have here a photo of the Brazil fire, which was a very devastating loss for a really significant museum in Brazil. And part of the emergency preparedness activity can be digitizing your collection if you haven't done a full digitization yet. A lot of, a silver lining that we heard coming out of this was that at least they had digitized their collections recently. So although it was a total loss specifically for their Pacific Northwest items, they did have really recent photographs, which is at least something in a complete loss situation. Also consider how you save information and important records. Waterproofing, fireproof, and portable containers, or in a cloud or a USB stick. If everything is in the building's a total loss, then you've lost your information as well. Create a critical contact list. Who's who in the zoo, police, fire, hospital, local government, emergency program contacts list, as well as infrastructure services, BC Hydro, Fortis, etc. Build a list of key suppliers and contractors. Develop an easy to access list to help you in emergency situations so you aren't looking for this information when you need it. Develop an evacuation plan. There are 3 evacuation stages in BC: alert, order, and rescind. Before an evacuation, during an evacuation, and after an evacuation. And here we have a photo of Hat Creek Ranch, one of our Provincial Heritage properties, which was a fire command center for Elephant Hill Fire in 2017. Make a shelter-in-place planning. For some emergencies, such as hazardous material spills, it may be safer to stay inside your facility. This is called sheltering in place and may only last a few hours. You will be instructed by emergency officials when you need to shelter in place, but being prepared for that and knowing how you're going to approach that with your staff, visitors, etc., is important to know ahead of time, so you can create less chaos in the moment that will feel very chaotic. Communications planning. Define roles and responsibilities, who to communicate with. That's all I'm saying on that. Test, review, update, and repeat your plan. Regularly test and review your plan to determine if it needs improvements or updates. It's ideal to schedule tests at different times of year, high season, low season, and shoulder seasons to gauge your capacity and ensure new employees are up to speed. So Provincial Heritage Property Planning, or PHP. The Provincial Heritage Properties are provincially designated historic sites under the Heritage Conservation Act that function as heritage site museums. They're a big part of the tourism industry in BC, especially some of our regional sites. These are owned by the province of BC and managed by not-for-profit societies. I've got Barkerville here in the room and Kilby on the stage with me. They all have specific emergency management plans to support their specific situations, buildings, collections, etc. Wildfire season has greatly affected many heritage sites in the province, including historic Hat Creek, shown in the last slide. However, the sites are also spread out throughout BC, so each site has its particularly high-risk emergencies. On top of putting at-risk protected heritage properties as tourism operators, wildfire and flooding seasons have negatively affected visitor numbers and required many sites to close during their busiest season, significantly impacting their ability to earn revenue. So there are losses that we need to consider here, that even if there isn't actually a fire at Fort Steele or at Barkerville, the site might have to close down because there is a fire near enough that they can't operate for weeks or months. And that does have a significant impact on the site, even if they aren't directly impacted by the fire. In the photograph of the last slide, I showed historic Hat Creek, and here I have a photo of Fort Steele Historic Site just in April 30th of 2023 with a fire that tore through their visitor center building. The visitor center building is not a historic building, but it is a big part of their operations as a tourism operator. It's where their gift shop is, it's where their restaurant is, it's where their offices is. So this is a really big loss to the site, but luckily none of the collections and nobody was hurt and no animals were hurt. They also have animals there as well. And it's just a reminder, as I was preparing this presentation, it was not lost on me that this had just happened the week before. April is not a time when we consider Fort Steele to be in wildfire danger. This wasn't caused by wildfire. We think this was caused by human means. They're still exploring why, potentially somebody smoking where they shouldn't have and throwing a cigarette where they shouldn't have, but the conditions were just so dry that caused a fire. So we need to be thinking more about these seasons are changing, the impacts are changing really quickly on us. And all of the sites, as I mentioned, have emergency preparedness plans, but these probably need to be updated because a lot of them were done 10 years ago, and our situation is changing. And as some of those changes, we've had to adapt what we're willing to alter to the heritage fabric of a site to better prepare for an emergency. So things we wouldn't have done 10 years ago because they would have been too much of an alteration to the historic fabric, we are now willing to do because the situation of wildfire risk in particular is so significant. So at Barkerville, we're exploring putting some tin roofs on some of the buildings as the roofs need to be replaced, and we're exploring putting sprinkler systems on the remaining wood roofed buildings. And these might not have been things we'd be willing to do because of the impacts to the heritage site, again, 10 years ago, but now we just see the significance of this situation and the significant risk increase, so we are exploring more severe alterations to protect the heritage features. So last slide here for me, I think. This is a historic Hat Creek, and the image on the screen is the flood response plan for the site, but it's also very similar with the wildfire response plan for the site. There have been small mitigation strategies at the site. One of the biggest recent ones is led by the Ministry of Transportation, was putting a bridge project at the site. And I wonder how I do the pointer. Oh, there we go. So the bridge location, the replacement bridge was built out of concrete and steel over the Caribou Wagon Road. So this would historically have been a wood bridge, but it is out of concrete and steel because it's going to be an alternative escape route for Highway 1 to Highway 99 South, and its material will allow it to survive a fire wildfire situation. So during a major emergency event, the heritage site in this way would function as a community emergency escape route for nearby communities if the main highway were closed. This is similar to in 2017 when it was closed by wildfires and it functioned as a fire command center. So I think we're seeing, we know these sites are really significant community sites and they always have been, but they're also playing a really big role in community emergency planning and in literally being a community emergency escape route through the site, and how can we support that work to make sure that you help the people get out. That's what we want, is to make sure everybody gets out. So this is only a fraction of the emergency mitigation strategies implemented throughout the PHP portfolio. The province has to approach emergency planning with these sites through multiple lenses, including protecting heritage assets and supporting significant tourism operators to continue operations. We continue to learn from past experience and rethink our emergency plans for the site in order to be best prepared for any situation. So now I'm going to pass to Chelsea to do a deeper dive into the Kilby Historic Site context of emergency planning.
Technology and note setup. But I'm Chelsea Brown. I'm the curator at the Kilby Historic Site. I am comfortable with she, her pronouns. I am a short little lady, and I've got pale skin and freckles and long brown/brunette hair. So, the Kilby Historic Site. Now that Teresa has explained some of the planning at a provincial level, I'll take you into some of the more specific contexts of one of the provincial heritage properties. We will focus mainly on what general risk assessment might look like, as well as mitigation and preparedness through a curatorial lens. First, let me introduce you to the Kilby Historic Site. We are a provincial heritage property located here in the Fraser Valley at Harrison Mills, BC. We have a 1906 general store. There we go. Oh, there, beautiful. 1906 general store, a demonstration farm, a cafe, and a campground. Because of this, we need to consider the safety of our guests, staff, animals, as well as the preservation of the archival, archaeological, historical collections, and the cultural belongings in our care. So, as Teresa mentioned, the Tourism Emergency Management Framework identifies 4 levels of response: provincial central, provincial regional, site support, which is municipal or regional, and the site itself. As you can see, there are lots of moving parts that come to play when a widespread emergency arises. Because of this, it is essential to understand where your institution's response meets up with other organizations or levels of government. So, what are your roles and responsibilities? The first step of creating or reviewing an emergency plan is to figure out what your responsibilities are. It is essential to interrogate and define your organization or institution's role in response to an emergency. Museums are public institutions that operate to preserve history and engage with the public at large. Because of this, museums are often owned or managed by several stakeholders such as municipalities, the province, Indigenous communities, nonprofit organizations, etc. Because of these overlapping structures and jurisdictions, it is essential to find the overlap and figure out exactly who is doing what. Start with identifying primary stakeholders. For us, the primary stakeholders are the province of BC, who owns the site, the Kilby Heritage Society, who operates the site, and the St'eles and Skowlitz First Nations, on whose traditional land we work and whose cultural belongings we recently repatriated. When you have identified the stakeholders, ask who has authority to make certain decisions, such as relocating the collection and cultural belongings if an evacuation alert or order is issued. If levels of authority are unclear, spend time now to define and clarify them. Review local, regional, and provincial emergency plans and ask how your institution fits into the story. Is it mentioned specifically, or do you have to define your own role? This can be a very important step. I once was talking to a curator and she was working on her emergency plan. She went to the city and found out that in the event of an emergency, they were planning on using that museum as a temporary morgue because it was one of the few buildings in the community that was climate controlled. So obviously this is the kind of information you need to know. So, also review your institution's insurance policy. Who owns the buildings, the collections? Does your insurance cover loans or other private collections held on the property? Ownership is obviously a problematic concept when we believe that artifacts and belongings aren't owned, but instead held in trust for the community. But insurance doesn't work that way. So, figure out who owns what. Also ask what your insurance covers. Does it cover the buildings, collections, staff, volunteers, other museum professionals who might come on site to help? Ask when the policy is activated. Is it activated when there's an evacuation alert, an order, or only after an emergency has occurred? Find out what the claim process is like and what kind of evidence you need to submit. Make sure you keep up-to-date images of all of your work, storage, and exhibit areas. These can be really helpful if you have incomplete inventories. They'll help you know what is lost and how to create a claim. At the Kilby Heritage Society, sorry, my technology is backfiring. 1 second. There we go. Beautiful. So yeah, once you know your responsibilities are and what local emergency plans are in place, start creating or reviewing your emergency plan to ensure there are no gaps or no unanswered questions. That's the last thing you want in an emergency, is trying to hunt down someone for an answer. This will help you keep your staff as effective as possible and will keep everyone as calm as can be. So, location, location, location. The emergencies your institution is most likely to face is inextricably tied to your physical location. Maps can be very helpful for identifying potential emergencies. We will look at some specialized maps in a second, but Google Maps is a good place to start. They have some helpful layers such as terrain to show topography, and satellite to show forests or urban areas, or the fires layer, which shows active wildfires in your region. Harrison Mills became a significant transportation hub and lumber milling community in the late 1800s and early 1900s because of the intersection of river and rail. It is out of this history that the heart of the Kilby Historic Site, our 1906 general store, was born. Here you can see that we are located at the confluence of the Fraser and Harrison rivers. You can also see where the railway crosses the river there. This map shows us that Harrison Mills is on a floodplain, that the surrounding mountains are forested, and that the Kilby Historic Site is located right beside a railway. In a cursory glance, we have identified flooding, forest fires, and train derailments as potential hazards. Less evident from the map, but ever present, is the threat of earthquakes. So here we have 4 of the most likely emergencies that we will experience at the Kilby Historic Site. These include flooding, fires, earthquakes, and train derailments. Learning from the past. While there are excellent provincial and local resources out there, cultural institutions have another tool at their disposal. Our own archives can offer a wealth of information, and they provide an easy way to audit past emergencies. Records of what has happened in the past gives us a better idea of what might happen in the future, and it can help us gauge the likelihood of certain emergencies. For example, in this photo, we see a train derailment that happened November 1955. It occurred west of us on the other side of the river by Lake Erie, where the railway tracks curve. By looking at the conditions of that event, we know a derailment occurring by the museum is less likely because the tracks are fairly straight and because we are located beside a bridge, so often they're moving past slowly. It is a risk, but not a high priority one. With this archival information, we also know that a derailment is more likely to occur in the winter months, when the museum is closed to the public. So this means that the primary concern for loss of life is minimized. Flooding. This is the greatest risk we face because at the Kilby Historic Site, we are located on a floodplain. Around this time of year, the water is usually at its highest as the warmer temperatures quickly melt snow on the mountains. The water finds its way to the rivers on either side of Harrison Mills. But the good news is that Harrison Mills was built for this. The entire community was built with flooding in mind. Here you can see how the row houses that local mill workers and their families lived in are built 6 feet off the ground. These photos were taken facing each other at different times. So you can see this building here is that building over there. Perfect. Purpose-built. The Kilby General Store was built even higher off the ground to be at the same height as the local railway station to facilitate ease of access for transferring goods and mail between the train and store. The front door is approximately 11 feet off ground. In the top photo, you can see the Kilby General Store, circa 1907, built above ground level. The bottom left shows flooding as seen from underneath the boardwalk that extended from the store to the railway, and the bottom right shows that while residences and community buildings were elevated, the agricultural buildings such as this dairy barn were not. Animals were evacuated by train when water rose. Despite being purpose-built, yearly flooding was detrimental for local farmers and community members. The community lobbied for a dike which was slowly built and augmented over the years, and since floods are much less drastic, though our campground, which is on the other side of the dike, does get flooded annually. The current dike also now provides an alternative access or evacuation route if roads are flooded or otherwise impassable. While flooding is the most frequent emergency we face, it's also the one we are most prepared for. Because of the potential for flood, our archives and most of our artifacts are stored or displayed above ground. The only exception is our basement, which primarily has metal artifacts such as woodworking tools and part of our tin collection of product packaging. While you wouldn't want anything to get wet, these artifacts would be able to withstand submersion without significant damage. The atmospheric river in November 2021 was a helpful little test run of what substantial flooding could look like. The surrounding fields and roads were flooded, but the water did not breach the dike or reach the museum buildings. There was some pooling on site, but it was primarily in our farm, so we just had to move our animals around. Access to and from the community was possible via the dike. Perfect. Here we have a map of a Fraser River flood scenario from a 2015 report. In it, the extent of flooding depicted is worse than the flooding experienced during the atmospheric river in 2021. However, that event proved an invaluable lesson. Scenarios like this aren't that far off. We learned that flooding is indeed possible, especially in the light of global warming and climate change. Today, in terms of travel, we are located midway between Chilliwack and Mission, BC. We are approximately 30 minutes from either. From the extensive flooding in 2021, we learned that the highway most likely to remain accessible is Highway 7 towards Mission, while Highway 1 and parts of Chilliwack will be underwater. Because of this, we realized that it makes more sense to have a list of storage facilities and restoration services based out of Mission or Abbotsford in the event of a flood, though we will, of course, compile a list of service providers in various locations, so we have alternatives if one route or another is impassable. We'll also take a little moment here to talk about floods that are not from rain or natural bodies of water. So in December 2020, we had one of our pipes burst in the museum. We have a pipe for fire suppression in the upstairs. While the museum is heated year-round, our previous heating system wasn't quite powerful enough to effectively reach the upstairs of the museum. The heating system has been upgraded. Even so, airflow in a historic building is always a struggle. So we are still very strategic in which doors we close in order to prevent the spread of fire in the event of a fire, and which we leave open to force warm air upstairs. We also keep a close eye on weather reports, and if there's extreme cold coming, we have a little space heater that we turn on low, but of course that comes with its own stresses. We also use plastic drop cloths over artifacts located under plumbing infrastructure and fire suppression systems as part of our winterization processes. Fires. So the Kilby General Store was actually built because of a fire. Pictured is the Harrison River Timber and Trading Company mill burning down in 1903. The company boarding house, which was then operated by Thomas and Eliza Kilby, escaped that fate only to burn down a few years later. That same year, the Kilbys decided to build their own general store. So I had contacted the CCI on an unrelated note, and they sent me this very handy-dandy map. So this map has an overlay of sort of historical fires in the area. It's very significant that it's overlaid on top of a satellite image. So we can see that some of the most significant fires that have happened here previously are possible again because the forests have regrown in those areas. So wildfire is most likely to come at us from that direction over the river because it's at its narrowest and there are trees on both sides. Also for earthquakes, you can see up at Harrison Mills, there hasn't been a lot of activity around us, but heritage professionals are often the first to tell us that the big one's coming. So we always want to be prepared for that. So we'll talk about having a clear and effective plan. Ensure that contact information is up to date. Compile lists of storage facilities and disaster restoration companies in various locations. Keep your plan as clear as possible. Create responses specific to the emergency. For example, to prepare for flooding, you should shut off a fire or electricity and water, but for a fire, both need to be left on. At the Kilby Historic Site, we're on well water, so we need electricity in order for firemen to be able to access our water. Also include photos and maps on how to shut off electricity and water, because that's something that can easily be delegated if there's enough documentation. And everyday habits and basic mitigation. Stay on top of maintenance for climate control, plumbing, and fire suppression systems. Replace incandescent lights with LEDs, which will produce less heat. Secure shelving units and display cases to walls for added stability. Clearly mark items prioritized for relocation. If an evacuation alert or evacuation order is issued, make inventories, maps, take photos. If you don't have time for that just yet, do what you can. So that might look as simple as getting sticky notes and writing on them, save in case of emergency. We've got some more useful tips. All the collections should be stored at least 6 feet off the ground. Store collections in boxes and drawers to minimize damage from earthquakes, and cover open shelving and storage areas with poly sheeting. There's perfect. So emergency planning highlights how important it is to create and prioritize projects that help you safeguard the collections in your care. These projects may include purchasing salvage supplies, getting training, buying a fire safe, digitization projects, etc. If you've been telling yourself that these are someday projects, this will hopefully get you going on your way to take concrete steps to real change. And then we've got some of our resources.
Lots of resources. I don't know if slides will be available, but we've got emergency planning templates that you can use if you're looking to develop your own and can't afford to hire an expert to do it. There are lots of grants available as well. Heritage Legacy Fund by the Great Heritage BC, Community Resilience Investment, and you can skip to the next one. Here's some more information. Resources. I didn't put much about BCHERN, but again, I cannot recommend them enough. Go to their website and check out everything they do.
Thanks. Yes. I was just wondering if any consideration had been given to eruption events. Like you're quite close to Mount Baker here. Do you have something in place to shut off your fresh air intake in the event of ash in the atmosphere? It would probably be useful with high smoke density.
Yeah, so we do have some sort of basic procedures in place because often there's wildfires in the area. So minimizing the fresh air intake that isn't so fresh. So we do have that incorporated, but not as detailed specifically for an eruption.
Yeah, good question. It's not something I've actually thought about for our Victoria location, but I think we should.
Good question.
And then just while I have the mic, I was also wondering about, you mentioned storing collections 6 feet off the ground. Is that off above grade or as opposed to floor elevation?
Yeah. You don't need to do that on many stories up.
Just during the Litton wildfire, how critical, I mean, depending, there's life safety issues and site abandonment, but how critical is it to get in there as fast as possible? I think Litton, it sounded like 3 months before you got in there. Would there have been any difference if you got in there earlier?
The sooner you can get in there, the better. Because it was 3 months of weather and rain, and so everything was compacted. So there would have been ceramics or breakable things that might not have been broken, that were broken by the end of all the weight and of the environment and everything else. Also, if within 72 hours, things can even stay wet. Like if you had artwork, for example, or textiles or something, if they stay wet for 3 or 4 days, you can still recover them quite easily before mold growth and things. So really that's your best bet, is to get in there as soon as possible, as soon as it's safe to do so. Yeah.